With the amount of videos I've made covering drama on the channel, I'm surprised it's taken me this long to make one talking about the Jeffrey Epstein case. Usually I reserve that subject for the goddamn news, but since I didn't make one back in August, I figured I would just use this as an opportunity to talk about two things involving the case. One of which has to be the biggest lie ever told. In true fashion, let's start with some good news. The Jeffrey Epstein birthday book has been released. For those of you who don't know, the birthday book is something Ghislaine Maxwell put together for Jeffrey Epstein's birthday that had a bunch of notes written by people who were very close to him. Yes, some of the information was redacted, but not the majority. For the most part, we got the whole enchilada, as well as some new photographs, all of which provide crucial information regarding the case. Now, I know Voidzilla just made a video talking about this on his second channel, which I'll link in the description. He analyzed the credibility of the book because, naturally, the administration was in denial and claiming it's all fake, but looking at the facts that were presented, he denounced it was all fake and concluded it must be an actual book because if it was forged, it was one of the most elaborate forgeries in the history of US politics.
238 pages of letters to Jeffrey Epstein. Most of them are about sex. If you remember, we extensively covered the Wall Street Journal scoop that Jeffrey Epstein's friends put together letters commissioned by Ghislaine Maxwell, and one of those letters included Donald Trump, although they also included Alan Dershowitz, Lex Wexner, Bill Clinton, Leon Blatt.
There's just a ton of new information and authentic photos of Epstein and friends in this book that have never been presented anywhere else before, and based on testimonials from everyone else in the book that wrote letters, they aren't denying its authenticity. It's just the president who's denying it. If the whole thing is fake, why is Donald Trump the only one pointing that out? I feel like there would be more people than just Donald Trump who would want to speak out and set the record straight, especially since this and everything else involving Jeffrey Epstein impacts so many people in high positions of power on both sides of the political aisle. Maybe they're trying to say that only his section was fake, which, if that's the case, would have been a really difficult thing to have slid into a bound book that was this watertight. Like I said, it would have had to be one of the most elaborate forgeries that was ever brought to light by the US government, but I guess I can't say that with 100% certainty. It's just a feeling I have deep within my f***ing sack. Anyways, getting back to the reason why I even made this video, the biggest lie ever told was when the Trump administration briefly tried to claim that Donald Trump was an FBI informant working to take down Jeffrey Epstein. I almost didn't believe this when I first learned about it. I thought it was satire, mocking how this administration has been dodging anything that ties Donald Trump's involvement to Jeffrey Epstein. But it's legit. I shit you not. They actually tried to pull a 5D chess move by claiming it was all a long-term bold strategy by Donald J. Trump. The courageous man that he is only got close to Mr. Epstein as a way of compiling evidence so the FBI could bring down that son of a bitch. To quote, when he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant trying to take this stuff down. What in tarnation? What kind of absurd claim is that? Honestly, I'm just surprised they didn't double down and try to convince the public that this has been in motion for almost a decade. That's the real reason why he ran for president. So they tried to say that once Donald Trump became privy to the bastard known as Epstein, they banished him from Mar-a-Lago. It was all an elaborate ruse. He was a super spy working for the FBI. This whole thing reminds me of that scene from How I Met Your Mother where Ted and Robin learn what Barney's job is. I love How I Met Your Mother, so I always try to find a way of referencing it when I can. Basically, Ted and Robin believe Barney became a corporate millionaire because the CEO was secretly setting him up to be the fall guy, but in reality, Barney was in cahoots with the FBI in order to take down the CEO because the man stole his girl over a decade ago. Now, obviously, that's not the case with Trump. You'd have to be a legitimate lobotomite and take everything that you're told word for word in order to believe that for even a second. Let's just analyze this for a moment. if Trump was an FBI informant, why wouldn't that be the first thing he'd say the moment Jeffrey Epstein got busted? If that was the case, that would be the first thing Donald Trump would announce, and things would not have escalated to the point where all eyes are on him and his involvement with Epstein. I imagine he would have used that as a huge talking point during both of his re-election campaigns. He would not stop sucking his own meat, talking about how he was the most successful spy, right up there with some of the greats, like James Bond and Agent Twilight. Also, I'm pretty sure the FBI would verify this. It wasn't Trump's deep cover that led to Epstein getting arrested, by the way. Not that any of this is even remotely true. This is just an outlandish narrative you pulled out your ass to try and explain your long-term connections to Jeffrey Epstein and the amount of times you flew on his plane. To say it was because you were an FBI informant, that's pretty unhinged. That has to be one of the biggest lies ever told. Right up there with, well, the time they tried to convince you there was no Epstein list. Just another thing to denounce this claim. If there wasn't a list, why the fuck did Trump even need to go undercover? This was so poorly received and mocked by so many people, even the most devout Trump supporters, that Mike Johnson had to play the Uno reverse card 2 days later in order to walk it back. His explanation? What I was referring to in that long conversation was what the Epstein victim's attorney said. More than a decade ago, President Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, and he was one of only prominent people, as everyone has reported, that he was willing to help law enforcement go after this guy who was a distinguished child abuser, sex trafficker, all the allegations. That's what they heard. So the president was helpful in that. I don't know if I used the right terminology, but that's common knowledge, and everyone knows that. So this is much ado about nothing. Also, Trump denounced his own theory by stating the reason why he kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago was because he found out about all the disgusting stuff he was involved with. According to Trump, the reason why they had a falling out was because people were taken out of the spa by him, in other words, gone. And people would come to complain that this guy was taking people from the spa. I didn't know that, and when I heard about it, I told him, listen, we don't want you taking our people. Whether or not it was a spa, I don't want them taking people. He was fine, but not too long after that, he did it again. And I said, outta here. So he throws his own claim out the goddamn window by basically stating, no, I actually kicked him out because he was stealing my workers. Those were my girls, so I told him to get out. What a fucking angel. Whatever Mike Johnson was referring to in his statement, it seems Trump shut down that idea. It's so crazy because it's real. All of this is happening in our timeline, and to me, it feels like whatever puppet masters are in political power, they're testing the waters to see how well these fantasies will float to the average person. They want to know how stupid you are and whether or not you'll hop on this life raft they keep tossing you. So they tried this FBI informant claim to see if you'll buy it, and hopefully by doing so, it'll help keep this administration afloat. But in this case, the ship had some shoddy craftsmanship, and people weren't willing to stick around to watch it sink. It was so stupid, and they want to find the perfect line of insanity that people will run with. Take, for example, the assassination attempt on Trump. Just like the Epstein case, that wasn't staged or part of some grand conspiracy. But the Trump administration was able to control the narrative, which gave them the advantage they needed to secure the election. I used my curse technique. I could see that bullet coming, so I activated the sharing gun. It feels like they're trying to recreate that same narrative, but this time involving the Epstein case. If Trump was involved with Jeffrey Epstein, it was all for the greater good of this country. Needless to say, nobody is buying that. And they shouldn't be trying to make a spectacle out of some very serious crimes involving real people who were victims. There's just no way there was some mix-up here in the terminology. What living, breathing human being would possibly get confused on what it means to be an FBI informant? Maybe a toddler who doesn't understand the difference between the FBI and their local police force, but not an adult who's in a high position of power. You called him an FBI snitch. That's an actual thing. And your rebuttal is, that's not exactly the occupation of Donald J. Trump. Actually, he never worked for the FBI, at least not in an official position that I'm aware of, and even so, didn't necessarily provide any evidence that led to the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein. Have you heard of Chris Hansen? What a moron. Like, the dictionary definition of an imbecile. I can guarantee there were some people who bought that response from Mike Johnson, but only like a small minority. I bet there were some people who even bought the initial lie that Trump was an FBI informant. Maybe a couple dozen, but certainly not me. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about this because it was one of the sillier political tactics involving the Epstein case. I am glad that a huge contributing factor to the investigation got released, and hopefully we get more updates like that, as opposed to these wild Hail Marys like Trump being an FBI informant. That's really about it. So,